Hello everyone, and welcome to my build guide, my Scourge Arrow Assassin. Now let's begin with a little build intro. What is Scourge Arrow? Let's go to the wiki and see what it says. Okay, so here it is. Scourge Arrow is a channeling bow attack skill that channels up an arrow and creates spore pods as the arrow travels, and the pods explode to fire taunt arrows around them. The arrows and pods deal physical damage converted to chaos damage. So basically it's a channeling skill that charges and release, and it deals physical damage converted to chaos damage. Now this skill is particularly good with poison damage for two main reasons. One is because of the physical damage conversion to chaos, and because typically enemies have less resistance to chaos. And another one is because of this particular line, 150% more damage with hits and ailments per stage. This makes it much easier to scale for damage over time builds, and because poisons is something that scales together with physical and chaos damage, typically people place Scourge Arrow on a poison build. And the good part of this is that, okay, poison can infinitely stack on an enemy, and these skills can actually shotgun, in the sense that one single attack can hit multiple times from the release and the taunt, from the release arrow and the taunt arrows. So typically the skill is using the Pathfinder Ascendancy, but I'm using an Assassin Ascendancy because the Assassin is an offense-oriented version compared to the Pathfinder, you could say, and is centered around critical strikes and poison damage. So he has a lot of access to some multipliers and mechanics that are only available that can scale together very well with critical strike chance and also poison damage, which we will go to in a minute. So actually this build is something I already played in my previous league. I even made a forum guide for it. It's just that I decided to convert it to a video guide on my YouTube, and I'm just thinking of trying to build up my content from there from now on. So you can still I'll still post the link to the forum guide if you want to check it out, but I'm not going to update it anymore, but the core of the build is still basically much the same. So without further ado, let's begin. Okay, so let's go over the offensive and defensive stats in the POV. Okay, just a quick disclaimer. The stats that you can see here is actually a conditional figure, particularly because the Assassin Ascendancy nodes that we are allocating provide different multipliers depending on enemy life, whether the enemy is at full life, low life, or anything in between, which comes from the node Ambush and Assassinate. So this particular DPS is coming from the stats when enemy is at low life. Yep, so I'm ticking this box right here, and the DPS is, the poison DPS is 490,000. That is actually very high for a poison build. And combined DPS 5 million, and the maximum theoretical DPS is 24 million, and this happens when you shotgun the enemy with your release arrow and taunt arrows at full amount, and applying the maximum poison stack. So actually the poison arrow build actually fluctuates a lot in terms of DPS, whether you hit the enemy or not with your placement of Scourge Arrow. So let me just fiddle around with the setting just to see how much the DPS will fluctuate. So if it's neither on full life or low life, it's 17 million. Low life 24 million. full life 22 million. And the defense stats is as follow. We're sitting at 60,000 effective hit pool with 4,600 life. Evasion rating 22,000. This mostly comes from our aura grace. Spell suppression chance from the tree 100%, and this is achieved through Mage Bin actually, and without counting the conditional chance to suppress spell damage from Revenge of the Hunted, since we might not always be on full life. So it's capped 100%. Resist everything capped with chaos resistance at 16%, because we're using the timeless jewel of divine flesh, since we're converting some of our damage taken as chaos damage, elemental damage as chaos from divine flesh, and also physical damage as chaos from our unique bow Darkscorn. So also the defense figures also differs because based on the Ascendancy note opportunistic, where it says we're getting reduced damage taken if there are at least two rare or unique enemies nearby. So let's configure that and just see how much it changes. So yeah, we can take a little bit more physical and a little bit more physical, elemental, and chaos hit, but our DPS reduces from that also. So yeah, the stats on this build is fluctuating because there's a lot of conditional modifiers, but rest assured, all of it is going to be applied. It's not like something unrealistic like having frenzy charges with cold snap when you're fighting bosses without any additional enemies. So that's it for the offensive and defensive stats. Okay, next let's go over the pros and cons of the build. So Scourge Arrow playstyle actually has an excellent clearing speed, even without the Pathfinder's poison proliferation Ascendancy node, which is, where is it? Here, Master Toxicist. So says here, when you kill a poison enemy during any flash effect, nearby enemies are poisoned. This is actually very good for certain number of poison builds, but actually Scourge Arrow by itself has a very good clearing capability, and even better when it's paired with Mirage Archer, which we'll be using without any gem swap. That is, we'll be using it all the time. So excellent clearing speed. Very good single target capability. This is part of the reason why we're playing the Assassin version, because it can ramp up the damage from poison so much more compared to Pathfinder, which is more of a defensive variant of the Scourge Arrow. And it's also decently tanky when you're using Darkscorn and Divine Flesh for that chaos damage taken conversion. It's also much cheaper to start, as we don't require many expensive units, except maybe one or two, which I'm not sure what's the price going to be for each league, but typically it's not something out of reach for most players. So that's that. And also, even though it's a damage over time build, because of the way Scourge Arrow works, where it charges up and releases maximum damage, you can see actually it provides a lot of upfront poison DPS. So it's not like other poison build where you typically need to hit like, I don't know, 20 times per second just to get whatever DPS you're seeing. You can see here, if I set my release of Scourge Arrow at lower stage, you can see the poison DPS is much lower. But if I release it at maximum, the damage goes from how much was it? 57,000 to 490,000. And yeah, with when we're using Mirage Archer, our clone will actually charge up to full stack before releasing. So that's a bonus. And also we're using poison you inflict on non-poison enemies deal 300% increased damage. So more upfront damage. Yeah. And it's also one of the few true sniping skills in the game, in the sense that you can just run around at maximum radius of the arena during bossing and just shoot to the center and not really caring whether you hit the enemy or not, because it just aim in the general direction. And it also, because of that, it doesn't benefit much from point blank, because it's a damage over time build. So yeah, one of the few sniping skills in the game that actually fires off screen, just like Cyrus die beam. Okay, what else? So, oh yeah, one last thing. It's also resistant to a lot of negative map mods. So you can do reflect, you can do knowledge, you can do, well, most of the map mods except maybe enemies have chance to avoid poisoning. That's going to make your build, your clear suffers a lot. Okay, so let's go over the cons of the build. First of all, oops, what did I do here? The build is using cluster jewel, so depends on your taste, whether you're okay with it or not. Personally, I don't mind builds that use cluster jewels even at league start, especially when you only require a few key notables, which I'll discuss upon later. But yeah, some people might not like it, so you do you. And next is, it's dependent on mana flask for its mana problem. We're using Enduring Eternal Mana Flask that says flask effect is not removed when unreserved mana is filled. So there's that. Some people would argue that slot can be spent better using some other more beneficial mana flask. So that's another con. And also Scourge Arrow, like I covered earlier, the DPS is actually highly fluctuating, not because of the conditional aspect of Ascendancy. It also depends on your playstyle. How much are you charging? How good are you at actually hitting the enemy? How is your release arrow placement? Yada yada yada. So there's that. And it's also a channeling skill. So you know what they say in modern Path of Exiles, standing still is actually a death sentence. So you actually need to know when you need to release just to trigger your Mirage Archer, and when do you actually need to charge up for your full stage. So there's a little bit of skill and judgment involved in that. And also its defensive layers needs a little bit of combo items and tree to set up, particularly regarding Divine Flesh. So it's something that you only use when you have positive chaos resistance for Darkscorn, and something you only Divine Flesh is something you only use when your chaos resistance is actually more than your elemental resistance. Otherwise, better if you stick with the normal elemental resistance. So you need some good resist gears as well, which is actually not too bad because we use quite a lot of rest. So there's a lot of slot we can use to fill our resistances. And ultimately it's still an evasion build, so one shot still happen. Okay, so now let's go over the offensive layers of the build. So as mentioned before, we're using Scourge Arrow and Mirage Archer. This allows us for a very safe and sustainable playstyle in the sense that mm, we can keep on churning out those DPS no matter our position. So because distance is far less of a concern, aim is also not much of a concern when you're off screen, things like that. So that's actually something that not all build can proclaim that they can do. So sustained DPS is actually more important than peak DPS. Next is a front-loaded damage over time DPS. This is something that I've already mentioned earlier. Most damage over time builds, most poison builds have a ramp-up period because the way the DPS is calculated is dependent on the poison duration and the maximum stacks. The POB just gives you the theoretical damage the enemy can suffer from your poison as you inflict the maximum amount of stacks. So what this build actually does is front load those DPS using a single charge by using the poison mastery. Poisons you inflict on non-poison enemies deal 200% increased damage, and charging Scourge Arrow to maximum stage until release, which is also the behavior done by Mirage Archer. So that's another offensive layer. And finally, why the damage is much higher compared to the Pathfinder version is basically this is a crit oriented damage over time build, and this is because of the Assassin's Ascendancy note. Where is it? Oh, here, Toxic Delivery. Where it says poison you inflict with critical strikes deals 25% more damage, and you actually have a increased base critical strike chance per poison affecting the enemy up to 2%. So this Toxic Delivery, as you can see here, by allocating these notes, I'm getting 20% DPS. Actually, this is something typically not done for most damage over time builds like ignites or punches, but this note alone basically enables you to inflict critical strike poison and also enjoy some of the mechanics that comes with critical strikes on hit, such as gaining Unholy Might, which is physical damage gain as chaos. What else? Yep, boots for elusive on crits, and some utility flasks which have the modifier percentage to gain flask charge during critical strike. So basically, it's not like you and also, oh sorry, one more thing, Perfect Agony, which converts critical strike multiplier to damage over time multiplier for ailments, which means that for nodes like, for example, Heartseeker which have 30% critical strike multiplier, this node converts that into 15% damage over time critical strike multiplier. So think of it as something as an extra damage that triggers separately because we deal critical strike, and not something that affects the initial hit. So that is actually achieved using one of the cheapest, well, you could trash uniques in the game, but it's actually one of my favorite actually. Ungil Summony, which says here you have 44% increased global critical strike. I think the range is 250 to 350 without catalyst. Yeah, I think it's 250 to 350, but it's actually very high, and your critical strikes do not deal extra damage, which actually doesn't matter. It doesn't gives us any downs. We don't suffer from that downside at all because we don't scale our hit. We just scale what triggers from the critical strikes on our hit. Okay, moving on, we'll cover the defensive layers. First of all is evasion plus spell suppression. Where is it? Spell suppression. Okay, we mostly gain our spell suppression from our tree, and evasion from our gears and also Grace Aura. So that's one. And then damage mitigation via Chaos Conversion. This is something that I've already mentioned earlier in the video, which is interaction between Divine Flesh and also Darkscorn. Darkscorn converts your physical damage taken into chaos damage, and Divine Flesh converts your elemental damage taken as chaos damage, and it also gives you maximum chaos resistance, which allows you to go from 75 to 80. And basically, when you want to caps out your resist this way in order to gain the full benefit of all this conversion. And next is after damage mitigation, what else? Oh yeah, life recovery on kill. Now this is actually very good for map sustain, and it's actually one of the reasons why people previously used Cinder Swallow before the Flash Charges nerf. So from the Ascendancy Noxious Strike, we recover 0.5% of life per poison affecting enemies you kill. Typically, most enemies we inflict, I don't know, at least 4 or 5, so you're getting like 3% of life recover on kill. And then from this node, Blood Drinker recover 2% of life, and then another one, Hired Killer, recover another 2% of life. So if you can actually see here, not sure how to make it. Yeah, life gain on kill. So Blood Drinker, Hired Killer, but the tree doesn't show the one from Noxious Strike. But this basically allows us to gain up to 200 no, actually 200 is not counting Noxious Strike, so it's actually more, maybe 300. So let's say 300 life per kill, and this is actually instant and not like leech. So imagine if you're clearing the maps and you're like killing 10 enemies at a time. That's 2000 to 3000 life recover per batch kill, where as you go from packs to pack. So that's actually a lot of life recovery, even though we don't have any sources of leech. So it's actually like Cinder Swallow on turbo, you could say. Okay, and then finally, why we're using Assassin is because we can actually get a lot of what we used to get from Pathfinder inside our new tree, particularly because we're using the crit conversion, the critical version of the damage over time build. So we allocate these nodes here for mana and life flask gaining charges, and also flask mastery utility flask gain 1 charge every 3 seconds. And also our surgeon flask, which allows us to gain flask charges when you deal a critical strike. So just from this 3 allocation and the suffixes alone, we can actually sustain our flask almost similar to Pathfinder, except we cannot actually utilize most unique flasks that way. But actually the build doesn't really rely on any unique flask at all, so that's a win-win for us. Okay, so next we'll cover on Mastery, Ascendancy, Bandits and Pantheon. Just some important point. For Flask Mastery, we're using the Utility Flask gain 1 charge every 3 seconds. And then Spell Suppression Mastery, this allows us to cap our Spell Suppression if our boots, helmet and gloves have evasion. So it's important to gear it to utilize this mastery. And also Poison Mastery, increase poison damage when you inflict on non-poison enemies. So that's the front loading of the damage over time DPS. For Ascendancy, So first we'll take Noxious Strike. This allows us to have, well, basically almost 100% chance to poison on hit by the time we get this Ascendancy node. And then we'll take Toxic Delivery. Once you take Toxic Delivery, you can actually start converting your build to the critical oriented build, that is Perfect Agony and this damage over time element from critical strike. You can actually start taking these nodes right here. And then ambush and assassinate and opportunistic, you can choose for yourself which one you want to go first, but eventually you'll take both. What else? Bandit. Okay, Bandit. So we'll just kill everyone for that 2 extra skill point. And for Pantheon, we're taking Grind King for stun recovery and also cannot be frozen. And also for minor Pantheon, you can either take Islatha for life loss charges or Shakari for reduced chaos damage taken, which if you still remember, we're converting our damage taken into chaos, so this actually helps also in that sense. Okay, then we'll go over to the skill gem setup. Our main link, we're using Scourge Arrow with Mirage Archer together with Unbound Ailment, Deadly Ailments, Void Manipulation, and Vicious Projectiles. You can change them to normal version if you want. Just putting it in POB because I just want to see the theoretical maximum theoretical damage. Next is our Wither Totem setups. Wither's faster casting, multiple totem, spell totem. This is just a basic Wither Totem setup. Next is our Gut Skill and our Dash. So for Gut Skill, we're using Immortal Call with the Enduring Composure small cluster jewel. This allows us to gain an endurance charge, and this basically makes our Immortal Call much more effective in reducing the damage taken, and also increases the buff duration because unfortunately Immortal Call only has a base duration of 1 second. So next is our standard dash setup, and then this is our Val skill. We're using Val Haste, Val Blight, and Val Grace. We're also running the normal aura version of Grace in our aura setup. So we're linking it to increase duration so that for better uptime. So Val Haste increases movement speed, attack speed. Val Blight actually has a grants a debuff to enemy. It hinders nearby enemy and also causes those enemy to take increased chaos damage. So it's actually a good addition for poison damage over time build. Then next is our aura setup. We're running as previously Grace, Malevolence, Precision, and Herald of Agni. Precision, you can just raise it to as high of a level that you need to, but leaving at least roughly 70-80 unreserved mana in order for your Immortal Call to trigger. And finally, we have our Frenzy and Power Charge generation. This is something that you just shoot off into the enemy once in a while just to gain those charges. So we're basically running all charges consistently with this setup. Okay, and finally we'll go over the gears and explanation part. So for our weapon, we're using the Darkscorn Assassin bow, and before that you can use just whatever high physical damage bow that you want, you can get your hands to. And for quiver, just something with, you can start off with Drill Neck. I don't have, so check Drill Neck. Yep, okay. So Drill Neck actually have arrow deals 50% increased damage with hits and elements to target DPS, and since Drill Neck itself provide pierce and Scourge Arrow actually also fierce enemies, so you can enjoy the full benefit of this quiver until you can get a good rarity quiver that has damage over time multiplier, bow attacks fire additional arrow, critical strike multiplier, life, attack speed, and because basically this is your DPS slot. Just what's most important is actually the bow attacks fire an additional arrow because it allows for better placement of pods. Next is our helmet. This is a flexible slot during early game. Just get whatever rest to fill up your resist, and during the end game, you take a rare. How do you craft this? Oh yeah, you just take a normal rarity helmet with one open suffix, so you can craft increased duration of ailments you inflict while focused. If I'm not mistaken, they nerfed this in 3.19, so I think this 80% is the current figure. And also you can use Searing Exile and Eater of Will implicit for increased despair, curse effect, and also physical damage from hits taken as curse damage. But you can actually play around with the implicit, it doesn't really matter. What's important in this slot is actually the resistance, life resistance, and the duration of ailments you inflict while focused. Next is our body armor. We're using the very cheap Dendrobate, which gives us some elemental resistances, some good evasion, and also some conditional increased damage with poison and poison duration if you have so and so amount of attributes. 300 dexterity, 150 intelligence, and this is something this is a body armor you can start using once you can get those attributes from your rings. Also, another option for body armor is the newly buffed unique in 3.19, the Covenant. This actually gives you a lot of DPS from support. Socketed gems are supported by level 29 added chaos damage. But I'm not sure how expensive or how rare this is going to be, so I'm not putting that in my cart yet. But if it's actually available and your build can actually afford it, yeah, why not? Go ahead. But just a reminder, Dendrobate also provides a good amount of elemental resistance, so you need to cap your resist as well. For the glove slot, we're using Embalmer because it's a good glove for chaos damage that you can get early, and you should get one with corrupted implicit for inflicting enemies with despair on hit. Boots, normal rare, and you can upgrade to elusive on crit. Boots, which is a redeemer influence boots. Yeah, I think if it's a redeemer influence boot, and this is you can also use Searing Exarch or Eater of Will Implicit. I think there's a poison damage deals faster or something. So yeah, it's up to you. You want a more deep you can go for more DPS gear or a more defensive oriented gear. Amulet, best in slot is Ungil Harmony because of the huge amount of critical strike chance. So I've already covered it in my earlier part of the video. Allocate anointments, we're using Dirty Technique for more poison DPS. Ring slots basically just resistances and some attributes to reach your Dendrobate threshold. So yeah, actually if you're switching to the Covenant, you can actually get change your attributes to resistances because we're only using those attributes modifiers to reach those Dendrobate thresholds. Belt, just a normal life and resistance belt, And searching eye jewel, this one, the important modifier is the accuracy rating, life, and chance to blind enemies on hit. So for our flask, we're using life flask for corrupted blood immunity, and then eternal mana flask. This is to solve our mana problem. Unfortunately, this is something you need to have, but in the early game you can actually use a unique ring called I remember the name, Chevron's Revelation, was it? Chevron. Yeah, Chevron's Revelation, where if you put it in your left ring slot, you can have 40 mana regenerated per second. That can actually solve your mana problem for quite some time until you reach maps. Then using Jade Flask, Quartz Flask, Jade Flask for evasion rating, Quartz Flask for spell suppression, and Quicksilver Flask for movement speed. And then we'll go over to the jewel. So, where do I start? Okay, actually, one of the most important part is Glorious Vanity Jewel, in the name of Zibaqua or Divine Flesh. And this is something you actually only slot in if you can cap all your resistance into 75, 75, and 80. Otherwise, you don't need to allocate to Divine Flesh so early. And then Unnatural Instinct, just something to get all these small bonuses in this node area right here. For Cluster Jewel, Large Cluster Jewel, we're using increased chaos damage. The most important node is actually Overwhelming Malice, which allows us to gain Unholy Might on crit. Then Unholy Grace, Touch of Cruelty, just quality of life and DPS boost. For our medium cluster, we're using increased chaos damage over time. The important nodes are Eternal Suffering, which gives you 50% chance to inflict withered for 2 seconds on hit if there are 5 of you withered debuff enemies on withered debuffs on them. This is actually very important during mapping because it allows us to basically have at minimum always 5 withered debuff without casting our wither totem. So it smoothen up the mapping experiences. We're using 2 because the chances actually stack, so 50% become 100%. So you basically always inflicting withered debuff. And since the skill shotgun, you can get that 5 stacks very easily. And then Student of Decay, just for chaos resistance. For small cluster jewel, we're using Enduring Composure for Endurance Charge generation, and also Modifying Aspect for more chaos resistance and also Malevolence efficiency, just to slot in all our essential auras. And yeah, I think that's it for the gear section. So I think that will be all for my Scourge Arrow Assassin build guide. Just a heads up, I also put most of my points here in the notes section of the build, so you can actually just roughly go through some explanation of what I've covered in the video. I'll share the link to the POB in the description, and if you have any question or comments, I'd like to hear your thoughts in the comment section below. That's all. Thank you very much. Bye bye.